cannot deny that this is the truth. It was so convincing. It was as if Allah was speaking to me directly.
He said, we as Christians, when we hear the Qur'an being recited, know that this is not the word of man. This cannot be the word of man.
The Qur'an incapacitates creation from producing anything like it. You cannot imitate the Qur'an.
In the Qur'an, even from the first page that I read, something inside me just said that this is the truth. You cannot deny that this is the truth. It was so convincing. It was as if Allah was speaking to me directly. And this is coming from a background of no religiosity at all. Like I considered myself an agnostic at the time. It's sent by Allah. It is sent by Allah. There's no other explanation.
I was once in an interfaith dialogue in which the MC was a pastor, a minister in the church. A young boy, Hafiz, recited some verses of the Qur'an from memory. When the boy sat down, the MC got up and he said, we as Christians, when we hear the Qur'an being recited, know that this is not the word of man. This cannot be the word of man. And then he said, it sends shivers up my spine, or up our spine, when we hear the Qur'an being recited. And this is nothing new.
On one occasion, the Prophet ﷺ goes to the Haram, to Mecca, and he begins to recite Surah Al-Najm out loud before everybody. وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى مَا ضَلَّ صَاحِبُكُمْ وَمَا غَوَى وَمَا يَنطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَى. He continues on reciting this beautiful and very powerful in meaning surah until he reaches the last section of the surah. فَاسْجُدُوا لِلَّهِ وَاعْبُدُوا. the narration, it mentions that after the Prophet ﷺ recited this verse, all of the people in the haram, the believers, with the Prophet ﷺ, with the mushrikeen that were opposed to him, they fell down in sujood before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They couldn't help it. They realized firsthand, they experienced it. It is the work of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
In the early or mid-1990s, Australia was very lucky, or the Muslim community was very lucky and fortunate to have a visit by Professor Zaghlul Al-Najjar. Subhanallah, I had the chance to transcribe one of his lectures, and I basically memorized the scientific miracles that he spoke of when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَكَانَتْ وَرْدَةً كَالدِّهَانِ, and it was as if it was an oil-painted rose. You know, we didn't know what that meant decades ago, but now we know that when we look up into the sky, the night sky, we can see an oil-painted rose in the night sky, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so beautifully described in the Quranic verses.
It's also got some amazing insights into the ancient past. The Qur'an mentions that the people of Abraham worshipped the sun, the moon, and a third celestial object. Recent archaeological discoveries have shown that the people of this region did indeed worship an astral triad of the sun, the moon, and Venus. Now, this knowledge was lost for thousands of years. It was only rediscovered recently in the 20th century. Chapter 10 of the Qur'an makes the claim that the Pharaoh of Moses was drowned in the sea, and that his body will be preserved as a sign for future generations. Historically, Egyptian priests hid the body of Ramesses II, who was the Pharaoh of Moses, in a secret location until it was rediscovered in the year 1881 CE. Today, the mummy is on display in the Cairo Museum. So, how is it possible that the author of the Qur'an had access to such knowledge?
The Qur'an incapacitates creation from producing anything like it. You cannot imitate the Qur'an. You can't produce something like the Qur'an. And in fact, in 3 different places in the Qur'an, Allah challenges creation to produce something like the Qur'an.
When they couldn't meet this challenge, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the challenge a bit more easier. فَأْتُوا بِعَشْرِ سُوَرٍ, then at least bring 10 chapters, like the chapters of the Qur'an al-Karim.
And given that they cannot produce even 10 surah of the Qur'an, he minimizes that challenge to even produce 1 surah of the Qur'an. And we know that 1 surah of the Qur'an is as short as just a few words,